So today is Yud Shevat. It's the day when the Frierdiker Rebbe of Yosef Yitzchok passed away 72 years ago in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, 770. It was a Shabbos, and passed away, I believe, in the morning. And throughout that Shabbos, our Rebbe, his younger son-in-law, did not cry. That's what they say, because halachically you're not allowed to mourn on Shabbos, but right after Shabbos, he mourned bitterly for his father-in-law. But this day of Yud Shevat is not just another Yahrtzeit of another tzaddik, but because the Frierdiker Rebbe was here in America as a Rebbe with an entire pedigree of 150 years, 5 consecutive Lubavitcher Rebbes who went through the hardest and most difficult issues, the Gashmias and Beruchnias, physically and spiritually on many levels. Therefore, his coming to America was for those Rabbonim, those rabbis, and few Hasidic Rebbes that were here from before 1940, it was a major breakthrough. And at the time, all they knew about him is that he's a Baal Mesiras Nefesh, that he's someone that put his own life on the line in the face of Stalin and the KGB, the NKVD, the NKVD, which it was called before the KGB. And not only that, but he also charged his Hasidim to do the same. And as I've told you many times, not everyone came back. Plenty were killed, Nebuch. And then there were those who had Mesiras Nefesh, and God saved their lives. And there was a group of 10, some of which I knew, who actually made a krisis bris, a pact, an agreement with the Rebbe to do or die for Yiddishkeit. And this was done both for children and for adults. Children, teenagers, and adults. The Chadorim, the Chedis for children. The what you call the Mesiftes for Bacharim. And then even programs for adults and college students and working students. This was called Teferes Bachurim. So on all levels, the Rebbe led an entire campaign, underground campaign. And the Rabbanim here in America, for example, Rabbi Eliezer Silver, who became the leader of the Orthodox Union and the Rabbanim, he knew that very well, and he supported it. And when the Rebbe came to America, he rolled out the red carpet for him, and you'll see more about that in Mitzvah Shem in my upcoming book. But anyway, the Rebbe, so he was known as a Baal Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe, at the same time, the previous Rebbe, his health was not good. And people make the mistake, they think it's because of the incarceration. I mean, the incarceration surely didn't help in 1927, but if you look at the picture, the video and the pictures of him coming to America in 1930, you see a man who walks straight and he looks like a royal king. And his speech was good. It was only later in the mid-30s, going into the 40s, where there was an issue with his speech. And ultimately in 1945, I think he had a stroke, another stroke. So his health, and when you see him come off the boat in 1940, that 10-year difference between 30 and 40, 29 and 1940, he looks like two different people. He looks aged. He's in a wheelchair. He needs to be held. His health really deteriorated. So those rabbis and rabbonim that were rebuilding, in America, didn't think much of him except that he's a holy sage. He had his spudik. He looked very, very holy. If you ever heard Shlomo Karlbach speak about him, and people who were like Chasidim and who gravitated to him in the 1940s, they talk of him as a father, very fatherly. And that's not just because he had that warm fatherly and motherly aspect to him. It's because his entire look was very, very lent itself to that sage like impression and character, and that yes.
What was it hereditary? His disease, was it hereditary?
Yes, but I don't want to go into that. The answer is, according to Rebbe Tzimchaya Mushka, who told a certain chassid in Crown Heights, she said it was hereditary. But I didn't do a study, I can't prove it, but she said yes. In other words, there's different, is a stroke hereditary? No, a stroke is not hereditary. So he had, in addition to what he had, in other words, I think he had, they say MS, and that could be hereditary. So part of what he had seems like was hereditary. Anyway, so the Yidden in the 1940s, in a way, the Rabbanim and the leadership didn't take him seriously. In other words, they looked at him as a sage, an old sage, a great Baal Mesiras Nefesh, a Hasidic rabbi and a Rebbe, and you go for a bracha to him, But no one looked at him as, let's say, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Rabbi Kalman Novitz, the people who were in good health and were very active, especially in the Vado Atzola to save Jews from the Holocaust and them building the Torah in America. They didn't look at him that way. Okay? Well, to their surprise, the Frierdiker Rebbe had a tremendous staff. He really was blessed with a great staff. And he had a staff, I would say, that was better than their staff. Now, what do I mean? Because they were Hasidim of his, they were more dedicated. And this touches upon the whole idea of a Chassid and a Rebbe. The relationship of a Chassid of a Rebbe should be much stronger than just a congregant to a rabbi or a yeshiva student to a gadol. It's a whole different category. And again, we need to spend a lot of time for bringing about that, and we don't have the time today. But just leave it at that his staff were his Hasidim. So they were going to do everything and anything to fulfill what he wants. Additionally, he had American students, some of which, as you know, were Torah Vodah students that came over to Lubavitch, to Chabad, and others, and they were on fire. They were on fire. And credit must be given to a Jew like Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson, who was here from the 1920s, who laid the groundwork in inspiring the Torah Vodah students and some Chaim Berlin students and some Yeshiva University Yitzchak Elchanan students to get involved. So the students of the Lubavitch Yeshiva in 770, they were on fire, and nothing could stop them. So in the previous Rebbe, let's say in the 40s, calls for a Shmira Shabbos campaign. They went out to the streets, and they had posters, compared to today, we would say it's small change, but then you have to understand this was very unusual. Or take, for example, with the late Rabbi Zalman Posner, it says how even in the 50s, when the Rebbe walked to Prospect Park for Tashlich, he said there was hundreds, maybe thousands of Yidden, and they weren't all from, because Kronites was a mix of Jews who belonged to the conservative movement and to the Orthodox. They would stand on the streets, it's Rosh Hashanah, it's beautiful weather, and all of a sudden these Chabadniks, and it wasn't like today 2,000, probably it was a 50 to 100 walking in the street. And he says you could see that they were marveled, and they never saw that. And the Rebbe walked strong and fast, and everyone is marching, and they're singing a nigun in the streets of Crown Heights, 1950s. This was unheard of. Today we take it for granted. You put on the loudspeaker and you drive your cars down the Dolev or here or there, and it's nice. Everyone enjoys it. In those days, Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, was very formal, very, very formal. And they didn't appreciate this. I mean, you have to hear Zalman Posner, people who actually did this with the Rebbe, speak about it, and you'll understand. Anyway, so the Rebbe had, so again, the previous Rebbe had a great staff, Rabbi Chadaka, Rabbi Nissim Mendel, Rabbi Quint, and different people. He had Bacharim, and then he had his two son-in-laws, and both of them were powerhouses. Rabbi Garari, the Rashag, the older Rabbi Shmayo Garari, was in charge of the yeshiva for the previous Rebbe, all the Lubavitch yeshivas, and they made 14 yeshivas in the eastern United States, from Providence, Rhode Island, to Boston, to Buffalo, to Philadelphia, to Rochester, on and on and on. And he was in charge of all the yeshivas. That means he was responsible for the budget of all the yeshivas. And even at that time was a lot of money. And he was well respected. You'll see about this also in the book that I'm writing about that period. I've actually printed some very interesting documents showing how he was like a king. He was the son-in-law of the previous Rebbe, and he came with that royalty. And then there was the younger son-in-law, the Rebbe, who merited coming miraculously because of the previous Rebbe's efforts and the Rashag to America, and Rebbe Eliezer Silver and others. He was saved from the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, and he came here in 1941. So from 41 to 50 is 9 years. 9 years of training and doing what the previous Rebbe wanted. And although officially the Rebbe worked as a draftsman, an engineer draftsman in the Navy Yard, that was, I don't know if all the 9 years, but it could be. And basically that's how he made his parnasa. His livelihood, his parnasa, didn't come from working for his father-in-law. He paid his own bills, and he didn't want to rely on his father-in-law, on tzedakah, because that's what the Rambam says. And the Rebbe was very, very frum that way. And although he could have gotten a salary, but he chose no. But whatever free time he had, he then worked for the Frierdiker Rebbe for Merkez. And at some point, he actually started to work full-time at Merkez. So those 9 years, our Rebbe really, really took the previous Rebbe's Maimorim that we're learning, and we're learning all these years, and in many of them he added footnotes of such scholarship from Kabbalah to Gemara to Medrash, from all over. And all of a sudden, some that had questions about the kind of simplicity of the previous Rebbe's Maimorim, like, this is for like kids. This is not real Gemara scholarship, Rambam, brisk, you know what I'm saying, that attitude. The Rebbe showed how in the previous Rebbe's Maimorim there are gems of the deepest part of Torah. In particular, you'll find this in the discourses of 1948 and 49. And he worked on this together with one of my Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Yitzchak Ushbal, in Gan Eden. And this brought a whole new respect to the Torah scholarship of the previous Rebbe. And in doing so, what was created was that the attitude changed from their previous Rebbe being just a Mesiras Nefesh Rebbe, an old Mesiras Nefesh Rebbe who's not well and it's just a matter of time before he passes away, to being a man for himself with an entire organization, with a great staff, and having 14 yeshivas, and all of a sudden, where do they come from? Here. Now, of course, this caused some envy, and we're not going to talk about that. I've written about that, in a respectful way, but it caused, issues, both with antagonists and even people who were neutral, And another thing they didn't understand is why the Rebbe doesn't join them, and the Rebbe's argument was, why don't you join me? And there's just too much to discuss. Really, I've really written a lot about this, because it's a whole sugya, it's a whole topic for itself. The bottom line is that slowly they saw what this previous Rebbe is about, that although physically he was not a well man, his mind worked, and he kept on pushing and pushing, and created what we have today 72 years later. Okay? What we have today, 72 years later, is directly a derivative, a result of those 10 years that he was in America. Yes, Yaini.
So my question is that in Chabad Hasidus, no other yard site is as much as a Yom Tov as this. Am I right? I mean,
yes, you're right.
Even the Alter Rebbe's yard site is not. It's not Yom Tov. I mean,
you're 100% right in what you just said. And,
why?
And there's two reasons for it. Because the Alter Rebbe goes back, 200 years. The longer you go back, the less you forget, and it's not active. That's number one, practically. Number two. Our Rebbe made this Yud Shvat into a Yom Tov. Seriously. Because in the first year, in 1951, January 51, preparing for the Yahrtzeit, he wrote an entire letter and he said what to do, to light a candle, to get an aliyah the Shabbos before, and to go to the oil and to write a pond. And he gave instructions and talk to your family about the previous Rebbe's Ahavas Yisrael and talk to other Jews, on and on and on. And every single year, and then he started to say the mimer that the previous Rebbe gave out, Basiligani, right? So there's not even a question. If the Rebbe would have not done this, it would have been like all other Rebbes. So you made a very good point. It would have been a yard side. You bring a little tikkun to the shul, you say l'chaim, and you go on. The Rebbe single-handedly created, you call it a Yom Tov, this special day. The Rebbe didn't call it a Yom Tov. The Rebbe called it the Yom HaYilula, the yard site. But the Rebbe, and then the Farbrengen. As the years went on, and by the way, you can go online to find, Rebbe Drive has so many beautiful pictures of many of the years, 75, 76, 77, an entire albums of pictures. And you can get a feeling, you'll see, and I was there, and I was there. I always say, and I was thinking about it, I think about it every Yud Shvat, the atmosphere walking in to 770. I imagine you're innocent, you were there in the 80s, but I'm talking about in the late 70s. Walking in last night for Ma'ariv, 7 o'clock was Ma'ariv, 7 or so. The place was swamped. There must have been 2,000 people just for Ma'ariv. And everyone is like preparing and thinking, and then when the Rebbe comes down, he walks in, you don't hear a pin drop in that room. Shh, mamish. All you hear is like the shvil, they call the aisle, the parting of the Red Sea as the Rebbe goes through up to the Chazan stand and says V'hu rachum yechaperova, and he starts Ma'ariv. It's elation, elation of awe. It wasn't in my days. There was no singing and dancing. It was very serious. It was a Yahrtzeit. It was a very serious day. Serious doesn't mean sad. It means serious, that, we're thinking about the person, his accomplishments, and what we need to do to enhance and continue that. And then, after the Rebbe left the shul, a student got up on the bima, middle of the whole shul, and reviewed by heart 2 paragraphs of Basiligani, the first 2. Today in the morning after Shachris, they did another 2, and by Mincha, another 1, something like that. So they split the first 5 chapters into the 3 tefillos where someone actually said it out loud for the public, and everyone stayed. No one got up and left. And it took 15 minutes to read, to say the mimer, 15, 20 minutes. But this was the norm. Last night I did it here in shul, so most of we have a Hasidic kollel in our shul. They left, and now Lubavitchers. But there was a small group of Lubavitchers that came to listen to the mimer, came to Ma'ariv, because that's the way we were raised. So I'm glad you brought that up, Yoini, and that's the answer. The Rebbe single-handedly turned this into a special day. Now, we Hasidim, look at this day not only as a Yahrtzeit, but we look at it as the day when the Rebbe became the Rebbe. Whether you say it was 1951, where you officially said a mimer, or you position that it was 1950 because when the sun sets, the sun rises. So as soon as the previous Rebbe passed on, the next Rebbe takes over. So we Hasidim feel that this day is a very special day for our Rebbe as well. Not only what he did for the previous Rebbe. So there's an extra element for us. And so we look at this And that's why today, again, as you go further away from the Yahrtzeit, from the original 1950, what I'm finding is that today's Hasidim, the new generation, they're putting the focus, I think, more on the Rebbe becoming the Rebbe today than the previous Yahrtzeit. And I'm not from that generation, and that's not the way I was raised. So, I don't call it, a Yom Tov. Someone called my wife yesterday on the phone. I heard her say, "Good Yom Tov." So I picked my head up like, no, it's not a Yom Tov, it's a Yahrtzeit. But, I understand for many people who weren't around those early years, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, it's, let me ask Yonason. Yonason, what were you left with as a Lubavitcher in the 80s with a feeling about Yud Shevat, that it's a Yahrtzeit or more than a Yom Tov of the Rebbe becoming Rebbe, or the same, or the Yom Tov is more than the Yahrtzeit?
Oh, it's more Yahrtzeit. It was a serious Yahrtzeit, like you said. There was no real celebration. There was no dancing and singing. There was a fundraising. There was serious fundraising from Morristown, where Rabbi Lipsker used to fundraise and Rabbi Michel and all of us used to fundraise.
Right.
But there was no dance.
Right. Okay, so Yonason is still, and that's in the 1980s, because his teachers, Rabbi Lipsker, Rabbi Vichnin, Rabbi Shalom, they were, from even older than I, so, to us, this was Yud Shevat. This is what and of course we knew the Rebbe became Rebbe, but that wasn't the emphasis. And even Rabbi Yoel Kahn, he didn't really, my recollection, he didn't, push this point. But like everything else, extremism works, hotheads work, and if you today we maybe for today's generation, to get them excited about Yud Shevat, what are you going to tell them? Is the previous Rebbe's Yahrtzeit? I have no connection to the previous Rebbe. I barely learned his Maimarim. I don't know who he is. Yeah, the Rebbe speaks about him, but our Rebbe, even if I wasn't around because I was born after Gimel Tammuz, etc., but still, it's still fresh, So maybe for them, this is necessary. That's why I'm not going to dismiss it quickly. Okay, let's go on. Yesterday, my wife sent me a copy of a letter that the Rebbe wrote to her grandfather, Reb Zalman Serebransky. And in this letter, he asks the Rebbe in 1950, I think the summer of 1950, he asks him whether his older son, which is my father-in-law, Reb Chaim Serebransky, if he could go to yeshiva and stop working. The Rebbe had instructed him to work in the orchards and the fields of when they came from France to Australia to Australia in 1949, and he was doing that. But his friends were all in 770. So, and he wanted to learn. So he asked the Rebbe, his father, does my son have permission to stop working and go learn? And the Rebbe answers him basically to continue working. But what I realized yesterday is that the Rebbe says to Reb Zalman, who was, a chassid in his own right, a very, very committed one to the Rabbeim, the Rebbe says to him, work until Yud Shevat. The summer of 1950, there were all kinds of issues. Who's going to be the next Rebbe? It was a very tense time, okay? So Moshe, what I realized yesterday is that the Rebbe writes to Reb Zalman Serebransky regarding your son about his work, let him work till Yud Shevat. Why? I mean, if he tells him to continue working, continue working. I mean, Yud Shevat from the summer is another 3-4 months. That's all it is. And this is my explanation. If you have a better one, use it. and this is relevant to our Farbrengen. A Rebbe is not a Rebbe in the past. He is a Rebbe in the present. If he's a Rebbe only in the past, you can put him in a museum. In the museums, you have pictures of what once was. And you can get inspired, but it's a museum. It's a relic of the past. A Rebbe needs to be present. This is based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. This isn't my chiddush, my novelty. That Hasidism, the movement of Hasidism, requires a present Rebbe. Now, what a present Rebbe is, the Breslover have their interpretation, the Chabadniks have their, and the Chernobyl have their, and that's another whole discussion, which I'm not going to go into. If you want to read about that, read my book, Breslov and Chabad. I wrote about that over there. But basically, the Rebbe was telling my wife Zayda, Reb Zalman, let him work till Yud Shevat. He was hinting to him that Yud Shevat is the first Yahrtzeit. He doesn't even say that. And something, it's like a premonition. To me, it's like a premonition the Rebbe had. Something big's going to happen Yud Shevat. And then you need to re-ask. Because everything changes. When a new Rebbe comes, I'm going to use a term that's not befitting for a tzaddik and Chabad, into the office. When a new Rebbe comes to the office, lahavdil, like a new president, what does the president do? He gets rid of all those Republicans who are going to be naysayers to him, out. If not today, tomorrow, it's just a matter of time. And he wants his people in who are going to basically go with him. Well, in the Rebbe world, in our Rebbe world, in the true Rebbe world, it doesn't work that way. In fact, the Rebbe didn't fire anyone. And in a way, he almost didn't hire anyone. Whoever was there from before, with the Frierdiker Rebbe, by the Rebbe's Kaddish, is holy, holy, holy. And you see that even in the Rebbe's will, that he left, whether signed, not signed, but you see that all the people that were part of the organization under the previous Rebbe are mentioned there and are very, very holy, and he wants them to be the continuation of Chabad, not as Rebbes, but as employees. Why is that? Why is that? Because his becoming Rebbe is a whole new spiritual avodah. The fact that this one is a secretary, and this one does this, and this one does that, that's not his. That the previous Rebbe appointed you, it's a life's job. But when it comes to Ruchnius, the Rebbe of the time, now God blesses him and gifts him with a new and different a blessing for what needs to be. So therefore, the Rebbe writes to Reb Zalman regarding whether your son should continue working. Let him continue working till Yud Shevat. Then the stars change, the spiritual energy changes, and we have to revisit. Again, I don't know if Reb Zalman did that or he didn't do it. Unfortunately, I didn't pick this up in the letter to ask my father-in-law, which I could have, and I'm sure he would have told me. But that's what it says. And when I read this yesterday, I said, about this we have to fabrik. Because this is the answer of Avram and Yonason and Yaini and Moshe to us and Velvel. The answer is, if your Rebbe is someone of the past, it's you're not on the same page. You're living with the past. You have to make it a reality now. And even though it's from 1994, it's so many years later till now 2002. It's many years later, but if we learn the Hasidus of the Rebbe, if we learn the Sichas, if we follow the instructions, and we make it part of our reality, then he's alive. He's alive. And you'll say, well, if that's the case, you do that for the previous Rebbe. So first of all, Eino Chanami, true. But nevertheless, when one Rebbe passes on and there's another one who replaces him, he becomes the new Rebbe. And the fact that the Rebbe passed on Gimel Tammuz and there's no one to replace him, that means he still is the Rebbe. But I don't want to go into, the positions and arguments there. But that's basically the idea. Yes, Jonas.
I became the Mamale Makom. He filled the faith and added.
Right. The Rebbe always used that word, Memale Mokim. Jonas, and thank you for reminding me. Very important words. Memale Mokim means he fills every aspect of the previous one is nishlam, is complete. So, Rabbi Sai, Chevre, it's Yud Shvat. It's a great day for brachas, opportunities. But as I've told you before, we are trained in Chabad that when you want something, you got to give something. There's no free rides here. That's the whole idea of a pidyon. When you gave a pidyon, or a settle, whatever, everyone, you gave a little tzedakah. In other words, you don't give tzedakah b'gashmias, it's tzedakah b'ruchnias, a commitment, a achlata. In other words, what are we going to do for the upcoming, this is Yud Shvat today, in the upcoming year, till the next Yud Shvat, Mitzvah Hashem Mashiach will come, and the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe and all tzaddikim will be back with us, but one thing has nothing to do with the other. What are we giving? What are we giving? And that's what we have to think about today. What am I doing for this tzaddik's neshama? That's the bottom line. I do want to conclude now with the Nigun of the previous Rebbe, known as the Benoni, the intermediate, which is the the paradigm of the Tanya, the individual who the Alter Rebbe talks about as the man's potential, which means each and every one of us has the potential to reach this stage. So this Nigun was actually composed by a rabbi, a chassid named Charitonov, Reb Aaron Charitonov, I believe. But the previous Rebbe heard it, and he loved the Nigun, and he asked that it be sung by many Farbrengens, and it became like his Nigun. So when the Rebbe said you should sing all the Nigunim of the Rabbeim on Matzos Rosh Hashanah, but Rosh Hashanah Farbrengen at the end, and other times the three Regolim, Shavuos and Simchas Torah, they would sing this Nigun for the previous Rebbe. Ay 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 ay. Ay 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 ladai ay ladai ay 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 ay. And then you repeat it, but I'll go to the second part now. Hi ladai ay hi hi ay hi ladai ay ladai ay 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 ladai. And you repeat that, but I'll go to the third part now. And this is the high part. Ay 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 ay, 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 lado, Eloi. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 la rayda. Ay, 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 la rayda. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, ay, la rayda, la ra ra ra, ay, ay, la ra ra, ra ra ra, ay, 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 la ra. The fourth part, and the voice goes down because it's the last part, the concluding stanza. Hi la da ya 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 ya. Hi la da ya 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 ya. Ay 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 la da. Ay 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. What does the nigun mean? I told you a little bit the history, who composed it, but what does the nigun mean? So Chassidim related, what it means is, if you know, if the individual singing this knows how he should behave or she should behave, if you know the way you're supposed to be, why aren't you so? That's the meditation while singing this nigun. So it's it's a nigun that demands of you, that obligates you. It's not a nigun, that's to be sung just because it has a nice meditative feel. It has a message, Avram. And the message is, if you know the way you're supposed to be, why aren't you nicer? And it happened once, while I was in Morristown, I don't know if Yadish and I ever told you this, but there was a Fabrengen, I forget when, and I was sitting next to Reb Melech Tzibel, our Mashpia. He was Mamish, gewaltige Talmud Chochem, and a Chassidish Yid, and a Bal Midas, very special Jew, one of a kind. And we were singing this nigun, and he already took some l'chaim. I was sitting next to him, and all of a sudden, as we were singing, that part where the voice goes up, the third part, and his fist came down on my arm. Oh boy, he was strong.
You got a good zet.
But it was coming out of love. It was coming out of feeling. It was coming out of looking at himself and saying, here I am, this massive Talmud Chochem, and the mashpia of the yeshiva, and phenomenal memory, on and on and on. But it's small change. Because if I didn't improve today better than yesterday, then it's nothing. It's basically, I was born this way, or I was trained this way, and I like being this way, but I'm not causing in myself an upheaval. And this is what Chassidus wants. Chassidus wants of us, and that's why you're asking a question, why isn't the whole world Chassidim? Because it's a tough job. Who wants to cause an upheaval in their life? Everyone wants to be comfortable. Everyone wants to look cool. Everyone wants to be part of, the community. Who wants to have this wild beard? You have a beard like this and then. I'm just saying. The Chabad Chassid, and it wasn't that, the Chabad Chassid did things, crazy things, but sometimes it was perceived like you're just not, this is not the way we do things here. And this is till today. Till today, I was in shul this morning. I especially went because I knew when I'll say Kaddish, I was saying Kaddish for the previous Rebbe. And all of a sudden, a Satmar was a very big mouth. He actually went to the Rebbe, and he's a good guy, a good man. He's, 60s or 70s. And he says to everyone, oh, he's saying Kaddish for the Raayatz. They called the previous Rebbe the Raayatz. So, and the young guys, they oh yeah. And right away he starts up with me, where's the tikkun? By us here in Shul, he says, you don't get to say Kaddish and celebrate a Yahrtzeit without tikkun. And he's right. He's right. But I just didn't get around to it. He is right. So I said to him, as a response, I said to him, what do you need the tikkun? You have me. I said, you have the Lubavitcher himself. My point is, what's my point? That you should know, when you walk into a shul, I don't care which shul it is, if they know who you are, or they smell from looking at you that you're a Chabadnik, all eyes go there. Whether it's Litvaks, Svardim, the Polish Hungarians, it's an interesting thing. I'm telling you, I've been to many shuls. Why? Why don't they look at the Eish Kodesh Rabbi or Biyan or Kloisenberg or Lakewood or Brisk? No, man, a regular Yid, his style. But when the Chabadnik comes into a shul, especially if he says a Kaddish, or gets an aliyah, and you hear him say the bracha with his havara, with his accent, they lift their heads. Oh, a Lubavitcher's here. And there is a practical answer because Lubavitcher's made so much noise over the years in different things. But there's also a nekuda of emes. And this nigun is really the nekuda. It's the upheaval. Our people, Lubavitchers, especially, in Russia, they, even without Stalin, they would cause upheaval in themselves. They never accepted that they're in a sense good enough. In other words, they always found something lacking in their avodah as Hashem, and they said, what more can I do to be a better person? To have more Avos Yisrael, which also touched upon, the Rebbe said we should talk about the previous Rebbe's Avos Yisrael. So it reminds us of the whole idea of Poshet having Avos Yisrael without any strings attached, from the most simple thing of giving a person a ride in a car and schlepping their groceries or calling them up. I just sent a WhatsApp to someone I met in Chicago 4 weeks ago. And the person, I could see from his response, wow, you're thinking of me. You're still thinking of me. He didn't say those words. He just answered in 2 words. But I can see that he was surprised that I just met him over one weekend, and I sent him, how are you? That's all I said. How are you? So this is Avos Yisrael. Avos Yisrael is Poshet to think about another Yid. And every one of us is Yidden all over that we've met. And including family. Family too. Let's not forget our family. So today is a day you send out a WhatsApp or a message or whatever your means of communication is to your family and grandkids and friends. It's a special day for Tefillah, the Yahrtzeit of Neshama of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak ben Reb Sholem Dov Ber. That's his name. You remind people. People forget. In other words, if I would have not been in the shul this morning, I'm telling you, no one would have remembered that today is the Frierdiker Rebbe's Yahrtzeit. No one. No. And that's why I especially go and sit down and do my learning, because I want them to remember that today is the Yahrtzeit of the previous Rebbe. That's a Lubavitcher. I'm not bragging because it's me. But the consciousness, the mindset of a Lubavitcher is to include others, not to make them Lubavitch, not to make them Hasidic. No. But to know that this tzaddik gave so much to the Jewish world, and today we're all benefiting from it. The Satmar Rebbe didn't come till 1947. The Kloisenberg didn't come till 1946 or so. Okay? The Raayatz came in 40. He came at the very beginning of the war. Miraculously was saved. So he had so many years on them. And he was older than them. And he had a whole staff. And then, like I said before, you can't imagine in Florida on the Miami, when I was hanging, when I was doing some work in the Miami area, I went into the Satmar Stiebel. They call the Karastir Stiebel over there, in the 41st Street area. And I met Satmars with white beards, old, and they said to me, again, they realized from this hat, I'm a Lubavitcher, and they said to me, Ich bin gewesen bei der Raayatz. I was by the Raayatz in 1940, in Tufshin Ches, and Tufshin Tes, in 47 and 48. Und hat mir umgewünscht, und hat mich gesucht. He blessed me and he advised me. You can't imagine how many of those Satmar you would never, their grandkids and great-grandkids have no idea. But they told me, because they were proud to share. So the Frierdiker Rebbe helped them. Mamish, Yidden, there's stories upon stories how he told the person. I'll give you one story. He didn't have an apartment. He was struggling with an apartment. And the Rebbe told him to go out and go to Borough Park. And he looks and he says, where am I supposed to go? The Rebbe doesn't say anymore. He told him to go to Borough Park and his issue with finding an apartment will be solved. He listened, not a Lubavitcher. He went to Borough Park, he went to a shul, he met someone who said, I have an apartment right next above the train station, New Utrecht over there, Yoni, the train, the D train or the B train, depending what years, right?
F train.
No, the F is on 18th Avenue next to me. I'm talking about next on 12th Avenue. Anyway, so, and he says, it's an apartment. There's a little noise because it's your window. You could see the trains, but it's an apartment. He said, I want to take it. He lived in that apartment 40, 50 years. All because the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, told him to go to Borough Park. Didn't make any sense. Where should he go, Borough Park? Walk the streets? So the Rebbe had Ahavas Yisrael. And this Ahavas Yisrael is what made him and Lubavitch special. No money, no honor, no greatness. Poshit, if you say in Yiddish, a toive ton a Yidden, to do a favor for a Jew. Not who the Jew is, not where he came from or comes from, not what he will be, nothing. And as a Yid, we have to help him. And this is a very important lesson for us. Sometimes someone asks you for a favor, and all of a sudden, is it good, is it bad? This question, that question. Don't ask any questions. Just do the favor. Don't play policeman, and don't play God, and do the favor. Now, naturally, if it's something that's a public issue, where it's a violation and everyone's going to know about it, that's a different story. For example, Dr. Feldman, the Rebbe's doctor, just passed away a few weeks ago in Crown Heights. Last year or so, a group of Israeli Bochurim came to his porch on President Street in Crown Heights, and they wanted him to sign off that they took the vaccine. He said, I'm not doing that. That's not kosher. And he wouldn't open the door. And you were talking about 20, 30, 40 guys. And he was intimidated. So he called someone who's a starker and a big guy. And he said, I'll be there in a second. He came there and he cleared them all off the porch. If you know what's good for you, away. The doctor's not doing it for you. You know what I'm saying? There are times when do him a favor. But in this manner, this time, in this period, this favor, as he is a doctor, would only be detrimental to what he needs to do to help others. So then he's not allowed to do it. And he didn't do it. But I'm saying just regularly, let's train ourselves to be on the good side, on the better side, on the helping side, and less, policemen and questions. Whatever. There's a lot to talk about that. Anyway, Chevre, it's Mifabrain, Baruch Hashem, on Yud Shevat. It's a short day, here, and by you too. So we have to, make some hachlotas, learn mishnayos. If you're able to learn a mishnah for each of the letters, if you can, it's online in English and Hebrew. Yosef Yitzchok. It's eight mishnahs. If you can do a whole parak, fine. I'm saying, do something. Talk to your family. Make hachlotas. The Able should help. We should only have simchas. And the Friedrich Rebbe's and Shomer, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak ben Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber should come back with Chiyas HaMesim, with all the tzaddikim and the Rebbe, our Rebbe, and we should only have simchas. And tonight, share some of these ideas with at the Farbrengen, with Rabbi Farrell, Rabbi Vichnin. You could if it's the right setting, share an idea so that. He'll see that you began Farbrengen already in the morning. Anyone want to say anything? Chaim. Yeah, everyone should have in mind all those that need brachas for shidduchim, and parnasa, and health. This is a time when we should think of them. Yoini, your father, he should have a refuah shalema, and we'll have shidduchim from our children in a easy way, in a Yiddish way, in a Chassidish way, and we should see Mashiach so that this pandemic will end and the Golus will end, and we'll really celebrate Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash with real revelation. Yes, Moshe.
Just want to say, Rabbi Dolphin, you asked if anybody want to say something.
Yes.
I'm very, very moved right now by what you shared with us, and especially one of the things that I've known for a while, but just has been reinforced so much more in our learning, is that it's not enough. And we just spoke about this recently. It's not enough that a person learned Chassidus, learned this, let's say, last week. We have to learn every day, not just learn, but we have to address these issues, the things that you brought up, especially the Nigun, how you explain the Nigun about where are we, who are we, and then why aren't we there, that we have to be working on that every day.
Absolutely.
And I read last night, before I went to bed, I read a story that was brought up by Mendel Asimov, who was one of the head shluchim in Paris. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, Mendel is the son. His father was Shmuel. So Mendel is the son who's the shliach today there, but his father was Shmuel Asimov. He made hundreds of thousands of Bali Tshuva.
Yeah. So he said that when his father, that when it was the court, I'm trying to make this very brief. When it was it was like 1986. It was the court case was going on with this, and that the Rebbe was going to the OL every day.
Yeah.
The Rebbe was going to the OL every day, and that his father in Paris decided he was going to do something. So he made some sort of a malava malka, some sort of activity on the Motzei Shabbos for all Yidden in Paris. To bring them together, to inspire them, to speak to them, to try to encourage them, to do more mitzvahs, outreach, etc. Obvious Yisrael. Then he said late that night he wrote up a report for the Rebbe. He faxed it in. This is in 1986. Faxed it into the Rebbe. Rabbi Klein got it on that Sunday, and the Rebbe had scheduled. He was planning to go to the Ohel that day, like he was going every day during that period.
Yes.
So he'd already gone to the mikveh. It was back at 770, and Rabbi Klein handed him the report from Rabbi Asimov in Paris. The Rebbe took it, looked at it, and he turned to Rabbi Klein and said, "Okay, we don't need to go to the oil today." He said, "I don't need to go to the oil today." And the point was that because of the actions that he did in Paris, so it had an impact on the Rebbe, on things in New York, on things all over.
Well, I never heard that. I never heard that.
It was written up by. They send it out every week. A story. I forgot the name of the email.
Okay, whatever.
The point is, the reason I'm bringing this up is connected to what our bringing today is because this idea of every day makes a difference. Every one thing, every effort that we do, every thing that we try, another thing, it makes a difference. And I'm so moved by the Nigun and how you touched the Nigun, how you explained it to us. I just think it's. I wanted to share that.
Thank you.
That.
And now the Nigun has been recorded for prosperity. It's online in Mitzvah Shem, so you can click on it and learn it. I mean, I sang the Nigun. Really have to repeat each stanza twice, but I sang it pretty accurately. And
yeah.
That's the way. If you want a Nigun to have an impact, you need to sing it slowly and articulate each movement of the Nigun, the high, the low, because there are feelings that are happening if you're singing properly a Nigun. It's not just, I have nothing better what to do, so it's time now to sing a Nigun, even a meditative Nigun. That's not real Chabad Nagina. That's not real Chabad melody. That's not the way our ancestors in Chabad composed these nigunim. These were, I mentioned the Charatonovs, what kind of Jews they were. They davened each day to Hashem for hours. They didn't have what to eat. And they expressed their love and awe for Hashem through a nigun. And that's how they composed the nigun. And there were two brothers. So Reb Aaron was more of a Morosh Chayra, more, on the serious side. His brother, Reb Shalom Charatonov, was more on the lively side. So there are other nigunim. There are many nigunim Chabad that came from these two brothers. And again, they lived in the early 1900s, that time. And you listen to Reb Shalom, some of Reb Shalom's nigunim. If you know it's from him, you will hear more alizah, more lebedik, more freiligkeit, more happiness and liveliness. You listen to Reb Aaron's, like this, in the Benoni, you will hear more Shcheiro, more seriousness. So again, there too, because they are who they are, they have different ways of how they related to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So all of these things, Avram, are part of a Chabad nigun, and that's why it's so important. And Mitzvah Shem, one day when we get to Eretz Yisrael, we can have nigunim sessions. I mean, it's just I've tried this, and the times I've tried it, it's been successful. But you really have to make it global. You have to go around the country and have nigunim sessions with Nalabavitchers, and I'm telling you, people will just. They will start thinking differently and feeling differently and wanting to. It's a whole different experience, and the nigun is a tremendous tool. Out of Farbrengen in particular, but even in your home and even under your talis, you sing a nigun and you allow your mind to go away from that intellectual and just let the nigun absorb you. And when you let the nigun absorb you, you're in the world of nigunim. And that's a very special world, that tzaddikim speak about it. It's brought down in Svarim. It's called the Shar HaNagina. The Shar HaNagina. Right? Anyway, Chevra, have a great day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. We will learn. L'chaim, only good things. Sei gesund. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Same driver?